very similar to what you're used to from doing supply and demand. So you really shouldn't feel, I don't know, you should just feel confident that you know how to do supply and demand. Let me just teach you some of the labels here, okay? So first of all, I'm going to zoom in on just one for now. Whenever you're doing foreign exchange market, you're always talking about two currencies in relation to one another, right? So in this case, for my example here, let's just pretend that we're going to do the US dollar in terms of versus the peso in Mexico. So a fair amount of countries use dollars. They're not the American dollars, but like Australia, Singapore, Canada, they all use something called the dollar. Peso is used in different countries as well, but I'm going to use the Mexican peso mainly because that's our bordering country, and we probably do, well, we not probably do, we do a lot of trade with them, okay? So if I want to do this graph over here for the US dollar, and this graph over here for the Mexican peso. Okay, so I want to show you how these two graphs would be different. And again, we're going to try to compare these two graphs with each other. Okay, I'm just trying to quit a program on my computer there. It's bothering me. Okay, sorry. Okay, so if this graph on the left is for the US dollar, we're going to show the supply of US dollars. And I sometimes just abbreviate the currency. You certainly could use the dollar sign here if you know the symbol of the currency. But as long as you're using a label that is universally understood or easy to understand because it makes sense with the question. So if you just put an S there or just put a D, that's not acceptable in terms of grading, okay? So I just want you to know that you need a subscript indicating that this is for the dollar. So again, it's your choice. If you know the symbol, go ahead and use the symbol, but you know, you always could abbreviate the currency or you could use an acronym like I did here. So I'm going to do US dollar on both of these. And then I'm also going to do quantity of US dollars. And over here on the y-axis is where it gets a little tricky. So my rule of thumb to just remember here is that you always put the currency that the graph is for. So this graph is for the US dollar. So I'm going to put the US dollar in the denominator, okay? And then the currency that you're comparing it to goes in the peso, okay? So when you're doing your graphs for currency, and I do this frequently, you know, multiple years every semester, I still have to take a moment to pause and say, okay, this is a graph for the US dollar. So that means that the US dollar goes in the denominator over here. So take your time with these and make sure that you're not losing points on missing labels or mixing them up, okay? So as far as those labels go, if you could just give me a green check mark if you're feeling okay with that. And you can use the red X if you need to ask a question about that. And just like supply and demand, and I'll let you guys click that in while I'm doing this, just like regular old supply and demand, we need to do dotted lines there, okay? And we're going to do down here, and I know we've used QE before for regular supply and demand, but you can use it here as well. You might see people just do a Q. I mean, like I said before, this graph, I would say that the label rules are a little bit more they're less stringent than something like the aggregate demand, aggregate supply, all right? And then over here on the left-hand side, I was taught to do ER for exchange rate. I know sometimes people might just use an E. I've even seen people use the pi symbol. I would encourage you just to do ER for exchange rate, okay? The last thing is that I've rarely ever seen numbers here. There could be a situation, this kind of is like the Phillips curve, where you have a question that says something like, you know, $1 US is currently the equivalent of 0.55 pesos. So you would put $1 down here on the Q, and you would put 0.55 over here for the pesos. But again, that's very rare. And when the situation arises, it's pretty easy because it's sort of always in terms of one for the currency that the graph is showing. All right. So I'll invite you to ask any questions if